I've been getting things a little wrong with these videos. I came from a background of advertising and making commercials for TV. And I thought they had to be slick and fancy. And lately I realized that it's not necessary. Everybody just wants to hear other people's opinions. Here on the Madman Rants, I am now just going back to my blog posts on justonecynicsopinion.blogspot.com and reading them because I get it. People don't like to read. Today, I'm doing one on Jordan Peterson, and I titled it Feminists and Jordan Peterson Share a Trap of Their Own Making. I'm about to say some very non-PC stuff that might get me in hot water, both with the alt-left and Peterson fans, but provocation stimulates deeper thinking, so here goes. I stopped being an unconditional fan of Jordan Peterson when he wrote a foreword for a new edition of the Gulag Archipelago, in which he trashed the political policy, called Socialism, that so many of his young followers are starting to have a very positive view of. In it, he grossly misrepresented the theories of Karl Marx, which were largely a critique of capitalism, not a springboard for communism. Peterson appears to be convinced that socialism inevitably leads to communism, along with the genocide, starvation, and misery that the world's biggest communist experiments perpetrated. What he and almost all right-leaning cheerleaders of capitalism ignore is the entirely successful example that the Nordic countries have implemented what I call democratic social capitalism. No one who appreciates the amazing proof positive that those countries have generated for over 50 years is suggesting that America should go down the route of armed revolution and the ensuing dictatorship that grew out of empowering a few unelected tin hat despots to run a huge country. And I'm talking, of course, about both the Soviet Union and China. All that intelligent analysts are saying, as opposed to dummies who shout about what their brain's hardwiring tells them just feels right, is that Medicare for all and free, high-quality education from preschool through university is the only way to be fair and reasonable in a society that looks after each other adequately. Capitalism has a single long-term outcome by definition. It must merge corporations, expand globally, and cut costs relentlessly until there are only a few megacorporations running the planet with their ultimate power over everyone. Jordan is a very smart guy, so how is it that he disappeared down this intellectual rabbit hole? Knowing a lot about him, having watched so much of his material and read all of his books, I think the answer is simple. Theory blindness. Peterson has become ensnared in a catch-22, not entirely of his own making, but he's certainly not owning up to it, or perhaps even recognizing it. He is correctly battling the postmodernist feminists who have taken control of the narrative of the left, but that has backed him into this blind alley he's now apparently stuck in. Peterson has so far refused to debate another professor, Richard D. Wolff, a Marxist with prodigious credentials who would quickly best him on the subject of socialism. He did speak with, it wasn't much of a debate, Slavoj Žižek, I'm never sure how to pronounce that name, who is a renowned Marxist philosopher, but despite the fact that he says he crammed for the conversation the night before by reading some of Marx's work, Jordan was far out of his depth, and Slavoj seemed to know this going in. He certainly soft-balled Peterson with no really strong socialist points or propositions. Peterson is smart enough to know what he is not an expert in, but doesn't seem to see how right-wing and misguided his claims about socialism are. Why? This is what I think. Because he is locked into a battle with the feminists who are ruining the academy in the West and weaponizing their philosophy, if it can be called that. The alt-left feminists operate under a banner of Marxism that started with the notion of social egalitarianism, as in women should have equal rights. But over the past 30 years, this has morphed into the totalitarian, politically correct doctrine that dictates every even marginally disadvantaged person should be elevated to ... Well, we're not sure where they should be elevated to, as they are already treated pretty equitably under the law in most Western countries. The why and the how of the transformation of feminism went from equal time and respect in academia to becoming the stormtroopers of political correctness. The why and the how are interlinked by the tenets of Marxism, which is all about social fairness, and the rigors of getting tenure in academia. To be perceived as being fair, the Academy had to allow feminism to become a field of study. If this broad category of humankind is sufficiently well defined to have its own discipline, then surely the professors of feminism would not stand in the way of the new field of what I call shorter than average people studies. That field would also embrace about half of humanity who are arguably disadvantaged by taller people. So once the discipline of feminism wormed its way under the gradually rising bar of political correctness, to continue with the fairness, tenure had to be available to these new professors. Earning tenure required them to write papers and required publications to publish those papers. Now imagine trying to turn shorter than average people studies from its infancy as a discipline into a source of analysis and dissection that matured into ever more dense theorizing and debate. Very soon you run out of serious material and thus move into the world of the arcane. This is the case with feminism, as those who have tested the boundaries of what will be accepted as serious papers for publication in this field have demonstrated. And I added in there a link to a YouTube video about a couple of people that did just that. And I'll include that below. Now, if you're in the position of continuing to have to study and write serious scholarly papers about something that simply has no demonstrable basis for the rigors of academic analysis, any more than shorter than average people studies does, you run into a very substantial problem. The issue is, how do you keep your job, much less defend the existence of your entire field of study? Simple. You take the basis for the initial creation of your field of study and you expand it to include everyone and everything that you can. Grow your field, expand your influence and your security. The basis for the origin of feminism was disadvantage, very simply. And there you have it, disadvantage. The seed for the ever higher bar for political correctness on campus, in politics, and across our societies is disadvantage. And now it includes even the perception of disadvantage. To protect their livelihood, both feminist professors and the administrators who work for them and support them inside of so many universities have gradually broadened their fight for equality from something that seriously affected over 50% of humankind for much of our species' existence, and it still does in much of the world, to encompass more and more minority groups, ever more narrowly defined, until we now have the elevation of extremely tiny disadvantaged groups to the level of claiming to require federal laws to be enacted in order to protect them. And not to protect their rights exactly, as those are actually already enshrined in equal opportunity laws, but to protect their feelings, even if their feelings change in unpredictable and inexplicable ways, like gender identification. It was against a new Canadian law enforcing speech, calling people by their ever-changing gender pronoun, real or invented, or go to jail, that Jordan Peterson initially rose to fame. You might be wondering why, given the fact that people who suffer from gender identity issues make up only about 0.6% of humankind. They are currently getting much more attention than, say, people with Lou Gehrig's disease, who our society is so far not encouraging to emerge from the shadows and feel empowered to wheel about town in their motorized vehicles. I have nothing against the disadvantaged, you understand. I am just making a point that we're seeing a lot more noise being made about one disadvantaged group, very small disadvantaged group, than another very small disadvantaged group. The answer is, again, both simple and obvious. When I was young, just after women in the West emerged from the homemaker era and entered both the academy and the workforce in significant numbers, that there was a growing LG movement, using the acronym for lesbian and gay, to make lesbian and gay folks free to come out and be open about their sexual orientation. Recently, the letters B and T got added to include bisexuals and transgender people to the movement. Then Q was tacked on for odd or tough to define gender-challenged individuals. And lately, the acronym has become, well, if we are to be honest, a bit of a joke. But what is the actual percentage out there of lesbian or transgender/queer feminist professors? Well, we don't have statistics on that, but I can tell you from my own experience on campus and watching YouTube videos on the issues that it is significantly higher than the general population, and understandably so. And this in no way is meant to put the sexual orientation of the many heterosexual feminists out there under scrutiny. If, as a woman, your sexual orientation leads you to be most interested in women, then it makes perfect sense that you would be very interested in women's studies and operating in a milieu that is female-centric. Now, if in addition to your sexual orientation being different than the majority's, you feel discriminated against in any way, such as the validity of your field of study being questioned or difficulty in getting publications to publish your academic work, then it would be understandable that you would carry a bit of a chip on your shoulder. How might that frustration play out in your life? Just maybe it would lead to you to want to enlist more members into your party of the disenfranchised, to expand your clique to include many more than just fellow feminist academics, such as other groups that feel they've been at a disadvantage compared to the majority. And as a professor, you have a forum, a podium, an open channel to enlist the aggrieved, to spread your message and welcome other minority groups in under the umbrella in a brand new oppression Olympics, as Professor Gad Saad humorously identifies the quote-unquote movement. Young people, students, love to feel like they belong to a special group. It's part of their developmental process, and it's written into their DNA as social beings who, over millions of years of our evolution, required the group they belonged to protect and support them. Parents were usually long gone by the time their kids reached age 20. So parroting the beliefs of a group cemented their bond with others and gave all of them solidarity against rivals. It is easy to exploit this tendency for figures of authority, which might explain why so many disinvitations of level-headed conservative speakers have been revealed to have been initiated and encouraged by left-leaning professors behind the scenes. It's kind of immoral of those professors, but understandable once you realize that the very existence of their discipline is at risk, and therefore their livelihood and professional identity and credentials. That kind of existential risk might spur all kinds of questionable behavior, like trying to get fellow professors who pose a threat on campus fired without knowing anything about that professor's real opinions or history. I'm, of course, speaking to the story of Bret Weinstein and several other professors of late. An existential threat might prompt some professors to encourage their students to go after other professors like Jordan Peterson. Now, Jordan, being a really bright bulb and profoundly original thinker with a very large pair of balls, might just defend himself by getting down to the very root of where all this nonsensical thinking originated. Sadly, he might be so laser-focused that he might even obsess over the roots while ignoring the tree trunk. Peterson's rants about his insight that postmodernism and Marxist thinking were at the root of the alt-left cancer we are facing today are 100% correct. But he has boxed himself in. His understandable anger at how feminism grew out of the notion of social fairness that Marx advocated has led him to be incapable of letting go of the fact that while socialism grew out of Marx's critique of capitalism and communism grew out of the tenets of socialism, today's evolution of socialism into the successful model of democratic social capitalism working so well in the Nordic countries has little to do with what happened in the Soviet Union and China. Equating any bastardization of socialism as a tool for dictatorial governance is intellectually dishonest, since there are so many more examples of capitalist dictators than socialist dictators. Jordan Peterson does his base of followers a profound disservice when he gives in to his brain's hardwired tendency to lean right and trashes socialism with the broad brush of communism. Yes, Jordan needs to keep up the fight against the increasing power of the alt-left and their spewing of PC extremism, especially battling the feminist studies professors, their hardwired for leftism colleagues, and the newly empowered administrators on campuses. It is essential that champions like Peterson, Gad Saad, and Bret Weinstein do this, since few other professors will risk doing so without their example. But his zeal for speaking to the seeds from whence feminism grew is blinding him to the future benefits that promoting democratic social capitalism will bring to his legion of young followers. As long as Peterson's focus is on the high-minded critiques of anti-Marxism and the issues with any belief in postmodernism, an opportunity is being missed to ridicule, in an easy-to-understand and effective way, the vapid field of feminism as a discipline that has any more validity than shorter than average people studies. Only once we undercut the power and influence of runaway political correctness can we begin the fight to reintroduce faith in scientific inquiry and cut the legs out from under the new broadly held notion that one's uneducated opinion, based entirely on one's brain hardwiring for leaning either left or right, is as valid and worthwhile as an expert's experience and high IQ analysis. We all need the rise of IDW, which is the intellectual dark web, superstars like Sam Harris, Eric Weinstein, who is Brett's brother, Ben Shapiro, Victor Davis Hanson, Steven Pinker, and their champions like Joe Rogan, Dave Rubin, and so many others, to reintroduce real thinking and data analysis to people with sufficient curiosity and analytical ability to listen. The caveat I'd make is that each of them needs to recognize the influence that each of their brain's hardwired tendency to lean left or right has on their opinions. In so many cases, especially with Shapiro and Hanson, I'm listening along and appreciating the points they're making right up to the point when they begin going down the conservative rabbit hole, blindly defending right-wing points that make the reward receptors in their brains light up, but have very little validity in the real world. The venerable Noam Chomsky is an example of this on the left. Rogan, Pinker, and Sad are the rare centrist exceptions to the hardwiring norm. Looking around at what has worked and what hasn't, it's clear to me that only centrist solutions are going to benefit the vast majority of people out there. What the world, and especially America, needs is a lot more democratic social capitalism and a lot less parasitic capitalism, like that of the one-party, two-faces version that the U.S. is currently suffering under. Unless the big thinkers of the world can wake up and admit to the fact that corporate interests and those of the money hoarders who own all the corporation's shares are doing humanity and the planet a sad disservice, we cannot begin to change the planet-destroying status quo and reverse the fact that we have gone back to having the self-anointed royal elite money hoarders controlling the rest of us for their own benefit. Now, if you get something out of these videos that I make and they make you go, hadn't thought about things that way, or make you see the world a little bit differently, then please go through the rigmarole of giving me a like on this video and becoming a subscriber on YouTube to my channel. And if you are really inspired and you want to buy me a beer and you think I deserve it, go to patreon.com and look up the Madman Rants and do me the favor of becoming a patron. Thanks very much for watching this video, and I hope you'll watch some more and join me again here on the Madman Rants channel.